Driven to Win presents Villette by Charlotte Brontë, a tale of mystery, solitude, and hidden emotions. In Chapter 11 and 12, shadows deepen at the pensionnat, a secretive portress watches silently, and in a quiet garden chalet, buried feelings begin to stir. What truths lie behind these silent walls? Let's begin. Chapter 11, The Portress's Cabinet. It was summer and very hot. Georgette, the youngest of Madame Beck's children, took a fever. Desiree, suddenly cured of her ailments, was, together with Fifine, packed off to Belmamont in the country. By way of precaution against infection, medical aid was now really needed, and Madame, choosing to ignore the return of Dr. Pillule, who had been at home a week, conjured his English rival to continue his visits. One or two of the pensioners complained of headache, and in other respects seemed slightly to participate in Georgette's ailment. Now, at last, I thought, Dr. Pillule must be recalled. The prudent directress will never venture to permit the attendance of so young a man on the pupils. The directress was very prudent, but she could also be intrepidly venturous. She actually introduced Dr. John to the school division of the premises, and established him in attendance on the proud and handsome Blanche de Melcy and the vain, flirting Angelique, her friend. Dr. John, I thought, testified a certain gratification at this mark of confidence, and if discretion of bearing could have justified the step, it would by him have been amply justified. Here, however, in this land of convents and confessionals, such a presence as his was not to be suffered with impunity in a pensionnat de demoiselles. The school gossiped, the kitchen whispered, the town caught the rumor, parents wrote letters and paid visits of remonstrance. Madame, had she been weak, would now have been lost. A dozen rival educational houses were ready to improve this false step, if false step it were, to her ruin. But Madame was not weak, and little Jesuit, though she might be, yet I clapped the hands of my heart, and with its voice cried, "Brava!" As I watched her able bearing, her skilled management, her temper and her firmness on this occasion, she met the alarmed parents with a good-humored, easy grace, for nobody matched her in, I know not whether to say the possession or the assumption of a certain rondure franchise de bonne femme, which on various occasions gained the point aimed at with instant and complete success, where severe gravity and serious reasoning would probably have failed. "See, pauvre Dr. Jean," she would say, chuckling and rubbing joyously her fat, little white hands. "Si, cher jeune homme, le meilleur creature du monde," and go on to explain how she happened to be employing him for her own children, who were so fond of him they would scream themselves into fits at the thought of another. Doctor, how, where she had confidence for her own, she thought it natural to repose trust for others, and rest, it was only the most temporary expedient in the world. Blanche and Angelique had the migraine. Dr. John had written a prescription. Voila! Tout, the parents' mouths were closed. Blanche and Angelique saved her all remaining trouble by chanting loud duets in their physician's praise. The other pupils echoed them, unanimously declaring that when they were ill, they would have Dr. John and nobody else. And Madame laughed, and the parents laughed too. The Labassecourians must have a large organ of filioprogenitiveness, at least. The indulgence of offspring is carried by them to excessive lengths, the law of most households being the children's will. Madame now got credit for having acted on this occasion in a spirit of motherly partiality. She came off with flying colors. People liked her as a directress better than ever Dot to this day. I never fully understood why she thus risked her interests for the sake of Dr. John. What people said, of course, I know well. The whole house pupils, teachers, servants included, had affirmed that she was going to marry him. So they had settled. Difference of age seemed to make no obstacle in their eyes. It was to be so. It must be admitted that appearances did not wholly discountenance this idea. Madame seemed so bent on retaining his services, so oblivious of her former protégé, Piliul. She made, too, such a point of personally receiving his visits, and was so unfailingly cheerful, blithe, and benignant in her manner to him. Moreover, she paid, about this time, marked attention to dress. The morning dishabille, the nightcap, and shawl were discarded. Dr. John's early visits always found her with auburn braids all nicely arranged, silk dress trimly fitted on, neat lace brodequins and loaf slippers, in short, the whole toilette complete as a model, and fresh as a flower, I scarcely think. However, that her intention in this went further than just to show a very handsome man that she was not quite a plain woman. And plain she was not. Without beauty of feature or elegance of form, she pleased. Without youth and its gay graces, she cheered. One never tired of seeing her. She was never monotonous or insipid or colorless or flat. Her unfaded hair, her eye with its temperate blue light, her cheek with its wholesome fruit-like bloom, these things pleased in moderation, but with constancy. Had she, indeed, floating visions of adopting Dr. John as a husband, taking him to her well-furnished home, endowing him with her savings, which were said to amount to a moderate competency, and making him comfortable for the rest of his life? Did Dr. John suspect her of such visions? I have met him coming out of her presence with a mischievous half-smile about his lips, and in his eyes a look as of masculine vanity elate and tickled. With all his good looks and good nature, he was not perfect. He must have been very imperfect. If he roguishly encouraged aims, he never intended to be successful. But did he not intend them to be successful? People said he had no money, that he was wholly dependent upon his profession. Madame, though perhaps some 14 years his senior, was yet the sort of woman never to grow old, never to wither, never to break down. They certainly were on good terms. He perhaps was not in love. But how many people ever do love, or at least marry for love, in this world? We waited the end. For what he waited, I do not know, nor for what he watched. But the peculiarity of his manner, his expectant, vigilant, absorbed, eager look, never wore off. It rather intensified. He had never been quite within the compass of my penetration, and I think he ranged farther and farther beyond it. One morning little Georgette had been more feverish, and consequently more peevish. She was crying and would not be pacified. I thought a particular draft ordered disagreed with her, and I doubted whether it ought to be continued. I waited impatiently for the doctor's coming in order to consult him. The doorbell rang. He was admitted. I felt sure of this, for I heard his voice addressing the portress. It was his custom to mount straight to the nursery, taking about 3 degrees of the staircase at once, and coming upon us like a cheerful surprise. 5 minutes elapsed 10, and I saw and heard nothing of him. What could he be doing? Possibly waiting in the corridor below. Little Georgette still piped her plaintive wail, appealing to me by her familiar term, "Minnie, Minnie, me very," poorly, till my heart ached. I descended to ascertain why he did not come. The corridor was empty. Whither was he vanished? Was he with Madame in the salle manger? Impossible. I had left her but a short time since, dressing in her own chamber. I listened. 3 pupils were just then hard at work practicing in 3 proximate rooms, the dining room and the greater and lesser drawing rooms, between which in the corridor there was but the portress's cabinet communicating with the salons, and intended originally for a boudoir. Farther off, at a 4th instrument in the oratory, a whole class of 12 or more were taking a singing lesson, and just then joining in a barcarolle, I think they called it, whereof I yet remember these words, fracciu, berceau, and venisso. Under these circumstances, what could I hear? A great deal, certainly, had it only been to the purpose. Yes. I heard a giddy treble laugh in the above-mentioned little cabinet, close by the door of which I stood. That door? half unclosed. A man's voice in a soft, deep, pleading tone uttered some words whereof I only caught the adjuration, "For God's sake." Then, after a second's pause, forth issued Dr. John, his eye full shining, but not with either joy or triumph. His fair English cheek high-colored, a baffled, tortured, anxious, and yet a tender meaning on his brow. The open door served me as a screen. But had I been full in his way, I believe he would have passed without seeing me. Some mortification, some strong vexation had hold of his soul, or rather, to write my impressions now as I received them at the time, I should say some sorrow, some sense of injustice. I did not so much think his pride was hurt as that his affections had been wounded, cruelly wounded, it seemed to me. But who was the torturer? What being in that house had him so much in her power? Madame I believed to be in her chamber. The room whence he had stepped was dedicated to the portress's sole use. And she, Rosine Mathieu, an unprincipled though, pretty little French grisette, airy, fickle, dressy, vain, and mercenary, it was not, surely, to her hand he owed the ordeal through which he seemed to have passed. But while I pondered, her voice, clear, though somewhat sharp, broke out in a lightsome French song. Trilling through the door still ajar, I glanced in, doubting my senses. There at the table she sat in a smart dress of Jacona's rose, trimming. A tiny blonde cap, not a living thing save herself, was in the room, except indeed some goldfish in a glass globe, some flowers in pots. And a broad July sunbeam. Here was a problem, but I must go upstairs to ask about the medicine. Dr. John sat in a chair at Georgette's bedside. Madame stood before him. The little patient had been examined and soothed, and now lay composed in her crib. Madame Beck, as I entered, was discussing the physician's own health, remarking on some real or fancied change in his looks, charging him with overwork, and recommending rest and change of air. He listened good-naturedly, but with laughing indifference, telling her that she was trop bonne, and that he felt perfectly well. Madame appealed to me, Dr. John, following her movement with a slow glance, which seemed to express languid surprise at reference being made to a quarter so insignificant. "What do you think, Miss Lucy?" asked Madame. "Is he not paler and thinner?" It was very seldom that I uttered more than monosyllables in Dr. John's presence. He was the kind of person with whom I was likely ever to remain the neutral, passive thing he thought me. Now, however, I took license to answer in a phrase, and a phrase I purposely made quite significant. "He looks ill at this moment, but perhaps it is owing to some temporary cause. Dr. John may have been vexed or harassed." I cannot tell how he took this speech, as I never sought his face for information. Georgette here began to ask me in her broken English if she might have a glass of eau sucrée. I answered her in English. For the first time, I fancy, he noticed that I spoke his language. Hitherto, he had always taken me for a foreigner, addressing me as Mademoiselle, and giving in French the requisite directions about the children's treatment. He seemed on the point of making a remark, but thinking better of it, held his tongue. Madame recommenced advising him. He shook his head, laughing, rose and bid her good morning with courtesy, but still with the regardless air of one whom too much unsolicited attention was surfeiting and spoiling. When he was gone, Madame dropped into the chair he had just left. She rested her chin in her hand. All that was animated and amiable vanished from her face. She looked stony and stern, almost mortified and morose. She sighed. A single but a deep sigh. A loud bell rang for morning school. She got up. As she passed a dressing table with a glass upon it, she looked at her reflected image. One single white hair streaked her nut-brown tresses. She plucked it out with a shudder. In the full summer daylight, her face, though it still had the color, could plainly be seen to have lost the texture of youth. And then where were youths? Contours? Ah, madame. Wise as you were, even you knew weakness. Never had I pitied madame before, but my heart softened towards her when she turned darkly from the glass. A calamity had come upon her. That hag disappointment was greeting her with a grisly all hail, and her soul rejected the intimacy, but Rosine. My bewilderment there surpasses description. I embraced 5 opportunities of passing her cabinet that day with a view to contemplating her charms and finding out the secret of their influence. She was pretty young and wore a well-made dress. All very good points, and I suppose amply sufficient to account in any philosophic mind for any amount of agony and distraction in a young man like Dr. John. Still, I could not help forming half a wish that the said doctor were my brother, or at least that he had a sister or a mother who would kindly sermonize him. I say half a wish. I broke it and flung it away before it became a whole one, discovering in good time its exquisite folly. Somebody, I argued, might as well sermonize Madame about her young physician, and what good would that do? I believe Madame sermonized herself. She did not behave weakly or make herself in any shape ridiculous. It is true she had neither strong feelings to overcome nor tender feelings by which to be miserably pained. It is true likewise that she had an important avocation, a real business to fill her time, divert her thoughts, and divide her interest. It is especially true that she possessed a genuine good sense which is not given to all women nor to all men. And by dint of these combined advantages, she behaved wisely, she behaved well. Brava, once more, Madame Beck, I saw you matched against an Apollyon of a predilection. You fought a good fight, and you overcame. Chapter 12. The casket. Behind the house, at the rue facade, there was a garden large. Considering that it lay in the heart of a city, and to my recollection at this day, it seems pleasant. But time, like distance, lends to certain scenes an influence, so softening, and where all is stone around, blank wall and hot pavement, how precious seems one shrub, how lovely an enclosed and planted spot of ground. There went a tradition that Madame Beck's house had in old days been a convent, that in years gone by, how long gone by I cannot tell, but I think some centuries before the city had overspread this quarter, and when it was tilled ground and avenue, and such deep and leafy seclusion as ought to embosom a religious house, that something had happened on this site which, rousing fear and inflicting horror, had left to the place the inheritance of a ghost story. A vague tale went of a black and white nun, sometimes on some night or nights of the year, seen in some part of this vicinage. The ghost must have been built out some ages ago, for there were houses all round now. But certain convent relics, in the shape of old and huge fruit trees, yet consecrated the spot. And at the foot of one a Methuselah of a pear tree, dead, all but a few boughs which still faithfully renewed their perfumed snow in spring, and their honey-sweet pendants. In autumn you saw, in scraping away the mossy earth between the half-bared roots, a glimpse of slab, smooth, hard, and black. The legend went unconfirmed and unaccredited, but still propagated, that this was the portal of a vault, imprisoning deep beneath that ground, on whose surface grass grew and flowers bloomed, the bones of a girl whom a monkish conclave of the drear Middle Ages had here buried alive for some sin against her vow. Her shadow it was that tremblers had feared through long generations after her poor frame was dust. Her black robe and white veil that, for timid eyes, moonlight and shade had mocked, as they fluctuated in the night wind through the garden-dashed thicket dot, independently of romantic rubbish. However, that old garden had its charms. On summer mornings I used to rise early to enjoy them alone. On summer evenings to linger solitary, to keep tryst with the rising moon, or taste one kiss of the evening breeze, or fancy rather than feel the freshness of dew descending, The turf was verdant, the gravelled walks were white, sun-bright. Nasturtiums clustered beautiful about the roots of the dotted orchard giants. There was a large berceau, above which spread the shade of an acacia. There was a smaller, more sequestered bower, nestled in the vines which ran all along a high and gray wall, and gathered their tendrils in a knot of beauty, and hung their clusters in loving profusion about the favored spot where jasmine and ivy met and married them doubtless at high noon. In the broad, vulgar middle of the day, when Madame Beck's large school turned out rampant, and externes and pensioners were spread abroad, vying with the denizens of the boys' college close at hand in the brazen exercise of their lungs and limbs, doubtless, then the garden was a trite, trodden-down place enough. But at sunset or the hour of salut, when the externes were gone home and the boarders quiet at their studies, pleasant was it then to stray down the peaceful alleys and hear the bells of St. Jean Baptist peal out with their sweet, soft, exalted sound. I was walking thus one evening, and had been detained farther within the verge of twilight than usual, by the still deepening calm, the mellow coolness, the fragrant breathing with which flowers no sunshine could win now answered the persuasion of the dew. I saw by a light in the oratory window that the Catholic household were then gathered to evening prayer or rite, from attendance on which I now and then, as a Protestant, exempted myself. One moment longer, whispered solitude and the summer. Mood, stay with us. All is truly quiet now. For another quarter of an hour your presence will not be missed. The day's heat and bustle have tired you. Enjoy these precious minutes. The windowless backs of houses built in this garden, and in particular the whole of one side, was skirted by the rear of a long line of premises being the boarding houses of the neighboring college. This rear, however, was all blank stone, with the exception of certain attic loopholes high up, opening from the sleeping rooms of the women servants, and also one casement in a lower story said to mark the chamber or study of a master. But though thus secure, an alley, which ran parallel with the very high wall on that side the garden, was forbidden to be entered by the pupils. It was called indeed l'allée défendue, and any girl setting foot there would have rendered herself liable to as severe a penalty as the mild rules of Madame Beck's establishment permitted. Teachers might indeed go there with impunity, but as the walk was narrow, and the neglected shrubs were grown very thick and close on each side, weaving overhead a roof of branch and leaf which the sun's rays penetrated but in rare checkers, this alley was seldom entered even during day, and after dusk was carefully shunned out from the first. I was tempted to make an exception to this rule of avoidance. The seclusion, the very gloom of the walk attracted me. For a long time the fear of seeming singular scared me away, but by degrees, as people became accustomed to me and my habits, and to such shades of peculiarity as were ingrained in my nature shades, certainly not striking enough to interest, and perhaps not prominent enough to offend, but born in and with me, and no more to be parted with than my identity, by slow degrees I became a frequenter of this straight and narrow path. I made myself gardener of some tintless flowers that grew between its closely ranked shrubs. I cleared away the relics of past autumns, choking up a rustic seat at the far end. Borrowing of Gotten, the cuisinière, a pail of water and a scrubbing brush, I made this seat clean. Madame saw me at work and smiled approbation, whether sincerely or not, I don't know. But she seemed sincere. Voyez-vous, cried she, comme elle est propre, cette demoiselle Lucy. Vous aimez donc cette allée? Mees? Yes, I said. It is quiet and shady. C'est just, cried she with an air of bonte, and she kindly recommended me to confine myself to it as much as I chose, saying that as I was not charged with the surveillance, I need not trouble myself to walk with the pupils. Only I might permit her children to come there, to talk English with me on the night in question. I was sitting on the hidden seat reclaimed from fungi and mold, listening to what seemed the far-off sounds of the city. Far off, in truth, they were not. This school was in the city center. Hence, it was but 5 minutes' walk to the park, scarce 10 to buildings of palatial splendor. Quite near were wide streets brightly lit, teeming at this moment with life. Carriages were rolling through them to balls or to the opera. The same hour which told curfew for our convent, which extinguished each lamp and dropped the curtain round each couch, rang for the gay city about us the summons to festal enjoyment. Of this contrast I thought not, however. Gay instincts my nature had few. Ball or opera I had never seen. And though often I had heard them described, and even wished to see them, it was not the wish of one who hopes to partake a pleasure if she could only reach it, who feels fitted to shine in some bright distant sphere, could she but thither win her way. It was no yearning to attain, no hunger to taste, only the calm desire to look on a new thing. A moon was in the sky, not a full moon, but a young crescent. I saw her through a space in the boughs overhead. She and the stars, visible beside her, were no strangers where all else was strange. My childhood knew them. I had seen that golden sign with the dark globe and its curve leaning back on azure, beside an old thorn at the top of an old field. An old England in long past days, just as it now leaned back beside a stately spire in this continental capital. Oh, my childhood! I had feelings, passive as I lived, little as I spoke, cold as I looked. When I thought of past days, I could feel. About the present, it was better to be stoical. About the future, such a future as mine to be dead. And in catalepsy, in a dead trance, I studiously held the quick of my nature. At that time, I well remember whatever could excite certain accidents of the weather, for instance, were almost dreaded by me, because they woke the being I was always lulling and stirred up a craving cry I could not satisfy. One night a thunderstorm broke. A sort of hurricane shook us in our beds. The Catholics rose in panic and prayed to their saints. As for me, the tempest took hold of me with tyranny. I was roughly roused and obliged to live. I got up and dressed myself, and creeping outside the casement close by my bed, sat on its ledge, with my feet on the roof of a lower adjoining building. It was wet, it was wild, it was pitch dark. Within the dormitory they gathered round the night lamp in consternation, praying loud. I could not go in. Too resistless was the delight of staying with the wild hour, black and full of thunder, pealing out such an ode as language never delivered to man too terribly glorious. The spectacle of clouds, split and pierced by white and blinding bolts, I did long, achingly, then and for 24 hours afterwards, for something to fetch me out of my present existence and lead me upwards and onwards. This longing and all the similar kind, it was necessary to knock on the head, which I did figuratively after the manner of jailed to Sisera, driving a nail through their temples. Unlike Sisera, they did not die. They were but transiently stunned, and at intervals would turn on the nail with a rebellious wrench, then did. The temples bleed, and the brain thrill to its core. Tonight, I was not so mutinous nor so miserable. My Sisera lay quiet in the tent, slumbering, and if his pain ached through his slumbers, something like an angel the ideal knelt near, dropping balm on the soothed temples, holding before the sealed eyes a magic glass, of which the sweet, solemn visions were repeated in dreams, and, shedding a reflex from her moonlight wings, and robe over the transfixed sleeper, over the tent threshold, over all the landscape lying without, Jael, the stern woman, sat apart, relenting somewhat over her captive, but more prone to dwell on the faithful expectation of Heber coming home, by which words I mean that the cool peace and dewy sweetness of the night filled me with a mood of hope, not hope on any definite point, but a general sense of encouragement and heart dash. Should not such a mood, so sweet, so tranquil, so unwanted, have been the harbinger of good. Alas, no good came of it. I presently, the rude reel, burst coarsely in all evil, groveling and repellent as she too often is. Amid the intense stillness of that pile of stone overlooking the walk, the trees, the high wall, I heard a sound. A casement, all the windows. Here casements, opening on hinges, creaked. Ere I had time to look up and mark where, in which story, or by whom unclosed, a tree overhead shook as if struck by a missile. Some object dropped prone at my feet. 9 was striking by St. Jane Baptist's clock. Day was fading, but it was not dark. The crescent moon aided little, but the deep gilding of that point in heaven where the sun beamed last, and the crystalline clearness of a wide space above, sustained the summer twilight. Even in my dark walk I could, by approaching an opening, have managed to read print of a small type. Easy was it to see then that the missile was a small box of white and colored ivory. Its loose lid opened in my hand. Violets lay within. Violets smothering a closely folded bit of pink paper, a note superscribed, "Pour la robe grise." I wore indeed a dress of French grey. Good. Was this a billet doux? A thing I had heard of, but hitherto had not had the honor of seeing or handling. Was it this sort of commodity I held between my finger and thumb at this moment? Scarcely. I did not dream it for a moment. Suitor or admirer my very thoughts had not conceived. All the teachers had dreams of some lover. One, but she was naturally of a credulous turn, believed in a future husband. All the pupils above 14 knew of some prospective bridegroom. 2 or 3 were already affianced by their parents, and had been so from childhood, but into the realm of feelings and hopes which such prospects open, my speculations, far less my presumptions, had never once had warrant to intrude. If the other teachers went into town, or took a walk on the boulevards, or only attended mass, they were very certain, according to the accounts brought back, to meet with some individual of the opposite sex, whose rapt, earnest gaze assured them of their power to strike and to attract. I can't say that my experience tallied with theirs in this respect. I went to church and I took walks, and am very well convinced that nobody minded me. There was not a girl or woman in the Rue Fossette who could not, and did not testify to having received an admiring beam from our young doctor's blue eyes at one time or other. I am obliged, however humbling it may sound, to accept myself. As far as I was concerned, those blue eyes were guiltless and calm as the sky, to whose tint there seemed akin. So it came to pass that I heard the others talk, wondered often at their gaiety, security, and self-satisfaction, but did not trouble myself to look up and gaze along the path they seemed so certain of treading. This then was no billet doux, and it was unsettled conviction to the contrary that I quietly opened it. Thus it ran, I translate, "Angel of my dreams. 1,000 thanks for the promise kept. Scarcely did I venture to hope its fulfillment. I believed you indeed to be half in jest. And then you seemed to think the enterprise beset with such danger, the hours so untimely, the alleys so strictly secluded often, you said, haunted by that dragon, the English teacher, you ain't veritable. Bigot Britannique, A.C.Q. vous dites espèce de monstre, brusquet rude, common view caporal de grenadiers, et revache commune religieuse." The reader will excuse my modesty in allowing this flattering sketch of my amiable self to retain the slight veil of the original tongue. You are aware, when on this precious effusion, that little Gustave, on account of his illness, has been removed to a master's chamber, that favored chamber, whose lattice overlooks your prison ground. There I, the best uncle in the world, am admitted to visit him. How tremblingly I approached the window and glanced into your Eden and Eden for me, though a desert for you. How I feared to behold vacancy or the dragon aforesaid. How my heart palpitated with delight when, through apertures in the envious boughs, I at once caught the gleam of your graceful straw hat, and the waving of your gray dress that I should recognize amongst 1,000. But why, my angel, will you not look up? Cruel to deny me one ray of those adorable eyes. How a single glance would have revived me. I write this in fiery haste. While the physician examines Gustave, I snatch an opportunity to enclose it in a small casket, together with a bouquet of flowers, the sweetest that blow, yet less sweet than thee, my Peri, my all charming. Ever then thou well knowest whom. I wish I did know whom, was my comment, and the wish bore even closer reference to the person addressed in this choice document than to the writer thereof. Perhaps it was from the fiancé of one of the engaged pupils, and in that case there was no great harm done or intended, only a small irregularity. Several of the girls, the majority indeed, had brothers or cousins at the neighboring college. But la robe grise, le chapeau de paille, here surely was a clue, a very confusing one. The straw hat was an ordinary garden head screen, common to a score besides myself. The gray dress hardly gave more definite indication. Madame Beck herself ordinarily wore a gray dress just now. Another teacher and 3 of the pensioners had had gray dresses purchased of the same shade and fabric as mine. It was a sort of everyday wear which happened at that time to be in vogue. Meanwhile, as I pondered, I knew I must go in. Lights moving in the dormitory announced that prayers were over and the pupils going to bed. Another half hour and all doors would be locked, all lights extinguished. The front door yet stood open to admit into the heated house the coolness of the summer night. From the portress's cabinet close by shone a lamp, showing the long vestibule with the 2-leaved drawing-room doors on one side, the great street door closing the vista. All at once, quick rang the bell, quick, but not loud, a cautious tinkle, a sort of warning metal whisper. Rosine darted from her cabinet and ran to open. The person she admitted stood with her 2 minutes in parley. There seemed a delay. Rosine came to the garden door, lamp in hand. She stood on the steps, lifting her lamp, looking round vaguely. "Quel compte?" she cried, with a coquettish laugh. "Person nia eat." "Let me pass," pleaded a voice I knew. I asked but 5 minutes, and a familiar shape, tall and grand, as we of the Rufusette all thought it, issued from the house and strode down amongst the beds and walks. It was sacrilege, the intrusion of a man into that spot at that hour. But he knew himself privileged, and perhaps he trusted to the friendly night. He wandered down the alleys, looking on this side, and on that he was lost in the shrubs. Trampling flowers and breaking branches in his search, he penetrated at last the Forbidden's Walk. There I met him, like some ghost, I suppose, Dr. John. It is found. He did not ask by whom, for with his quick eye he perceived that I held it in my hand. "Do not betray her," he said, looking at me as if I were indeed a dragon. "I ever so disposed to treachery, I cannot betray what I do not know," was my answer. "Read the note, and you will see how little it reveals." Perhaps you have read it, I thought to myself. And yet I could not believe he wrote it. That could hardly be his style. Besides, I was fool enough to think there would be a degree of hardship in his calling me such names. His own look vindicated him. He grew hot and colored as he read. "Is indeed too much. This is cruel. This is humiliating," were the words that fell from him. I thought it was cruel when I saw his countenance so moved. No matter whether he was to blame or not, somebody, it seemed to me, must be more to blame. "What shall you do about it?" he inquired of me. "Shall you tell Madame Beck what you have found and cause a stir in Esclander?" I thought I ought to tell, and said so, adding that I did not believe there would be either stir or Esclander. Madame was much too prudent to make a noise about an affair of that sort connected with her establishment. He stood looking down and meditating. He was both too proud and too honorable to entreat my secrecy on a point which duty evidently commanded me to communicate. I wished to do right, yet loath to grieve or injure him. Just then Rosine glanced out through the open door. She could not see us, though, between the trees I could plainly see her. Her dress was gray, like mine. This circumstance, taken in connection with prior transactions, suggested to me that perhaps the case, however deplorable, was one in which I was under no obligation whatever to concern myself. Accordingly, I said, "If you can assure me that none of Madame Beck's pupils are implicated in this business, I shall be very happy to stand aloof from all interference. Take the casket, the bouquet, and the billet. For my part, I gladly forget the whole affair. Look there," he whispered suddenly as his hand closed on what I offered, and at the same time he pointed through the boughs. I looked. Behold, Madame in shawl, wrapping gown, and slippers, softly descending the steps and stealing like a cat round the garden. In 2 minutes she would have been upon Dr. John, if she were like a cat. However, he quite as much resembled a leopard. Nothing could be lighter than his tread when he chose. He watched, and as she turned a corner, he took the garden at 2 noiseless bounds. She reappeared, and he was gone. Rosine helped him, instantly interposing the door between him and his huntress. I too might have got away, but I preferred to meet Madame openly. Though it was my frequent and well-known custom to spend twilight in the garden, yet never till now had I remained so late. Full sure was I that Madame had missed, was come in search of me, and designed now to pounce on the defaulter unawares. I expected a reprimand. No, Madame was all goodness. She tendered not even a remonstrance. She testified no shade of surprise. With that consummate tact of hers, in which I believe she was never surpassed by living thing, she even professed merely to have issued forth to taste la brise du soir. "Quelle belle nuit!" cried she, looking up at the stars. The moon was now gone down behind the broad tower of Jean Baptiste. "Qu'il fait bon, qu'il l'air est frais." And instead of sending me in, she detained me and she to take a few turns with her down the principal alley. When at last we both re-entered, she leaned affably on my shoulder by way of support in mounting the front door steps. At parting, her cheek was presented to my lips, and "Bonsoir, my bonne amie, dormez bien," was her kindly adieu for the night. I caught myself smiling as I lay awake and thoughtful on my couch, smiling at Madame. The unction, the suavity of her behavior offered, for one who knew her, a sure token that suspicion of some kind was busy in her brain. From some aperture or summit of observation, through parted bough or open window, she had doubtless caught a glimpse, remote or near, deceptive or instructive, of that night's transactions. Finely accomplished as she was in the art of surveillance, it was next to impossible that a casket could be thrown into her garden or an interloper could cross her walks to seek it, without that she, in shaken branch, passing shade, unwonted footfall, or stilly murmur, and though Dr. John had spoken very low in the few words he dropped me, yet the hum of his man's voice pervaded, I thought, the whole conventual ground, without, I say, that she should have caught intimation of things extraordinary transpiring on her premises. What things she might by no means see, or at that time be able to discover. But a delicious little ravelled plot lay tempting her to disentanglement, and in the midst, folded round in cobwebs, had she not secured Miss Lucy, clumsily involved, like the foolish fly she was. That was Villette by Charlotte Brontë, Chapter 11 and 12. Mysterious turns, silent watchers, and a heart quietly awakening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more literary journeys. See you in the next chapter.